Good morning to you all. Um, got some rather sad news to share, and it happened several days ago, and just getting around to discussing it. But Congressman John Lewis of Georgia's 5th Congressional District passed away. He was 80 years old. He lived from 1940 to 2020. Um, Checking up on his background, he uh, he was educated at American Baptist University and Fisk College. He was prominent in the civil rights movement. Worked closely with Martin Luther King. In the early days, he was with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He worked with the Freedom Riders in 1961, interracial group of people traveling through the South, um, trying to basically struggle for integration, which the Freedom Riders, of course, met with a lot of difficulty when doing so. Um, Throughout the 60s, as I said, and he was very prominent in the civil rights movement. Um, when Andrew Young of the 5th Congressional District got a job in the Jimmy Carter administration as a Secretary of State, um, John Lewis also had a position in the administration working with Action. Now, I'm not particularly sure what Action is. For what I could tell when looking it up, it was like an agency that oversaw other agencies within the federal government. And I'm kind of embarrassed to not know the significance or too much about that position, which I guess for some would say that's an argument against big government when you don't know what some of the various departments of our U.S. government. Oh well, I'm sure that it was not a wasted venture. Hmm, I'm sorry, Thursday this morning. After leaving the Carter administration, um, January '81. Um, he returned back to Atlanta and ran for city council and was a member of the U.S. Excuse me, he was a member of the Atlanta City Council from 1981 to 1986. In 1986, he decided to run for the U.S. House of Representatives. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I would say fortunate in the sense that you had two superb candidates in the Democratic primary, but unfortunate in the sense of which one will you choose. It was him and Julian Bond, another civil rights prominent figure, that challenged each other in the Democratic primaries for that 5th congressional district seat. And John Lewis won, and he got elected, and he served from January 1987 until his death recently, a few days ago. Um, During his tenure in the U.S. House of Representatives, uh, he was pretty much considered a strong liberal, especially by Southern standards, because many Democrats here in the South, once they're elected, they tend to be a little more conservative than some other parts of the country. But not John Lewis. John Lewis was a pretty decent liberal and has a voting record to prove it. Um, One thing I like about John Lewis with regard to what perhaps his ideology might have transcended into was that he thought highly of Congressman Claude Pepper of Florida, who was a fiery pro-labor, feisty New Deal Democrat. Throughout the decades, he to the point where he was almost a relic of the past. Very liberal, very pro-working class, and some of the right-wing a-holes in the country at that time referred to him as Red Pepper, basically trying to accuse Claude Pepper of being a communist, which he wasn't. But Um, John Lewis had a lot of admiration for Claude Pepper. As a member of the U.S. House, to show up his liberal credentials, he was a strong supporter of LGBTQ rights during a time when even many liberals were nervous to touch on that issue. Um, Also, he was a strong proponent of Medicare for all, kind of known as single payer health care, also at that time called national health insurance. He was on the correct side on the issue on health care, and that is to be commended, because Medicare for all is probably one of the most important things that can happen to this country in this day and age. If there's one reform that needs to take place, that would be Medicare for all. John Lewis was a proponent of Medicare for all. I know he voted for the Affordable Care Act. I know he fought to keep it in existence, because that's all there is as far as universal health care is concerned. An imperfect program, but his solution was better, and that is to go Medicare for all. And I like members of Congress who are for Medicare for all. Makes me want to support them. Um, in 2001, at the inauguration of George W. Bush, another reason to admire John Lewis, he boycotted that inauguration. He had the foresight to know that George W. Bush was flawed and his presidency was not earned. He didn't win the election. He was not elected. He was selected by the Supreme Court. Remember that election where everything got stalled in Florida? America's worst president to be. And John Lewis decided to show his disrespect to George W. Bush. That's more of a feather on his cap, as far as I'm concerned. That makes him a great man. He opposed the Iraq War, voted against going into Iraq, another area where that's a no-brainer. He was proved to be correct about what a mistake the Iraq War was. Um, in 2008, he was an early supporter of Hillary Clinton, but he switched over to Barack Obama, which was a mildly better choice. But I got my criticisms of John Lewis too, and that is in the year 2016 and in the year 2020, not choosing Bernie Sanders as a presidential candidate in the primaries. And I'm not trying to sour things, but that's just kind of disconcerting, because Bernie Sanders' views are much closer to John Lewis's views than Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders' views are much closer to John Lewis's views than Joe Biden. But other than that, and well, actually, let me go into why I'm a little dismayed about him with regard to Bernie Sanders, saying he doesn't remember Bernie Sanders. And for a man that was involved with the 1963 March for Jobs and Freedom in Washington, D.C., the MLK I Have a Dream speech, John Lewis was a big organizer there. Sure, Bernie Sanders was not a well-known person, but he attended that march. But you got to remember, John Lewis was a member of the Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. While I'm not particularly sure that John Lewis was a member of the Socialist Party of America, Julian Bond was. He ended up in DSA. But if you're in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, back in the days when Stokely Carmichael was more moderate in his politics, you will see the Socialist Party connection. Bernie Sanders was a member of the Socialist Party of America through its youth section, Young People's Socialist League. And I just needed to draw that tidbit because of the connection between civil rights and democratic socialism. yeah, other socialist movements were involved. Liberals were involved, and pray tell, even some you know good conscience conservatives were involved supporting civil rights. I mean, it was it was decent to support it. It was the right thing to do. But I am sorry that Congressman John Lewis passed away. He was one of my favorite members of the U.S. House of Representatives. He was a member of the House Progressive Caucus, which is um, which is one of the more liberal institutions in the U.S. House. And I hope whomever succeeds him will live up to his expectations, and he will be greatly missed. And pretty much all I have to say, and I say this to everyone that passed away in my Anglo-Catholic tradition, Kyrie Eleison, memory eternal. John Lewis, I will miss you. I'm Bernie Bro. If you like what you heard today, feel free to subscribe, like. Remember the algorithms, they're important. I'm trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and only you can make that possible by subscribing. So I'm I'm asking each and every one of you, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. And I also urge, as a free speech radical, that get on your platform here on YouTube or anywhere else and let your voice be heard. This is the new arena of freedom of speech is under attack, and the best way to get your voice heard and maybe a movement can take place where freedom of speech can be kind of restored in ways that's been slipping away for us for years. I'm Bernie Bro. Take care, and until next time.